Hey folks, Matt Sharp here with another Pacific Angler Friday Fishing Report. We're filming for February 21st, so if it's nowhere near February 21st, click up here. This is a link to all our Friday Fishing Reports, and we do it every Friday, so I've probably got something more up to date for you. This week, we are looking at the second to last week in February. It's moving fast, and we've had a pretty decent February when it comes to conditions. It looks like that's going to continue. We're getting relatively warm weather, and that's going to do well for both our steelhead fisheries and our bull trout fisheries. I also wanted to touch base this week on a fishery that's coming down the pipes and one you guys want to start thinking about. It's almost cutthroat season. With that in mind, Andre brought in his fry patterns. We're going to take a look at that, but I'm going to give you guys an overview of the cutthroat fishing that can be tackled in the lower mainland, and give you guys some basic concepts of the fish and some basic tips so you can get out there, do some scouting maybe now, leading into the season that really starts off in March. So we're also going to touch base on a mistake that I made. A couple weeks ago, I did a piece on what was changing with Vedder steelhead when it came to some regulation changes and some stuff that might be considered for the next season. Now, this was a conversation I was having with a friend, and we were throwing ideas back and forth, and when I was taking notes, I must have read into something a little bit too far, and I want to make sure I correct that, because obviously I want to bring you guys good information, truthful information, and precise information. So you'll want to stay tuned for the Vedder section. I'm going to touch base on some things they can do to increase or decrease the number of fish they take for the hatchery. On the saltwater front, we actually had some okay reports last weekend. It may not have been as good as we would have liked it. Guys were still finding fish, but when you look at it, it made sense. We had some big tides last week, some big moon cycles when our boats were going out, and this week with the more mellow tides, things have been excellent. So I'm going to touch base on that. We've got some fish pictures for you in the saltwater section. Lastly, we're going to sneak peek at what Jay's been up to. I want to have more information on this, but right now he's taking a well-earned vacation. He's down in the Olympic Peninsula, and he's been sending back some funny pictures to us. He also sent back a really cool video from one of the guides he's working with. It's a slightly older video, but it's a really neat one if you want to see cool scenery shots, some beautiful spey casting, as well as an interesting mindset on how this guide is working with the river, with the steelhead, with the fishery down there in the Olympic Peninsula. Guys, as always, you want to see more fishing reports like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and let's get into her. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in this week. I have a pretty good one for you. We're going to touch base on some fisheries coming up, as well as obviously the fisheries going on right now. I am filming Wednesday night. It's quite late Wednesday night, so the slides should be fairly up to date, but always check down here. I'll give you guys when the slides came from, because they're always going to be a little bit different what I'm talking through, because the weatherman is slightly off. It seems quite a bit lately. So when we pull it up, right now, we're going to be looking at Vancouver, and the story this week is that it's relatively warm, which is great for February. It's not very common that we see this, and it's usually common that we get like a 2 or 3 week spell where it's just utterly cold, and it makes the river levels go really low and makes it quite challenging. But we're seeing 8 degrees on Thursday, tomorrow when I'm going to be editing this, and 8, 7, and 6 coming into Friday, Saturday, Sunday for you guys out fishing. Pushing into next week as well, it looks reasonably warm. Not balmy by any stretch of the imagination, but reasonably warm. The nights are getting fairly cold in sort of that 1 to 4 degrees range, but when we throw it up to Squamish, that's going to obviously affect our fishing a little bit more. And we scroll down, it's looking like 10 degrees on Thursday. Now, obviously you guys will be watching this Friday, but that means we're going to get some warmth in the water, and that leads us to talking about a possible salmon fry hatch. I think it's still early. We're going to touch base on that at the end of the report, but that's what's cueing us to start thinking about this shift in fisheries. You'll see 10, 8, 6, and then we got a little bit of rain on Sunday. Fair amount actually when you look at 20 to 25, but as you guys know, previously 20 to 25 millimeters might have been a concern, but in the last 3 months, a report like this has not really materialized. It did it again last weekend. It did not come as predicted, so I don't think we're gonna have any problems with that. Now, we do see some snow in the forecast, but again, the weatherman that this far out has been off a few times, so it's hard to tell what will happen, but at least for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it should be go time. throw it out to the real-time hydrometrics for the Squamish, we can see that it is very low right now. It's at a 1.7, which makes it almost a ditch in many parts. That said, we should see some active fish with the warm weather. I don't expect it to be anything to write home about, but I definitely think it's worth getting out there. Make sure you got some fry pattern. There might be something like that. Nymphing a fry this time of year is actually a really good bet where you're not swimming it, because the fry that are coming out can barely swim right now. They might get washed out and tumbled out, but that can be a good technique this time of year, or your Albion style pattern. So it's a fry with sort of an egg sac off of it. I've seen guys even peg fry patterns with a bead above them to achieve the same thing. Now, when we look at the Chilliwack, we've had some good reports and the water levels have been pretty darn nice this last week. They're getting lower, but still not too low, because we haven't had that really, really cold spell in February. And again, we're looking at really nice conditions, 9 degrees, 10 degrees, 7 degrees. Reports have been solid. It's obviously steelheading, so it's not one you're going to probably catch every single day that you're out, unless you're out a lot. But the reports have been solid, and I expect them to continue over this weekend. I do expect the river to continue to drop. Now, the news on the slide is we're getting about 3, maybe even 4 feet of visibility right now as we're filming this on the lower river, courtesy of that slide. Normally, it would be gin clear in these conditions, and that's actually a good thing right now because it's keeping the water a little more colored and less likely to spook fish. So get out there and enjoy it. Bring your reasonable sized presentations, your medium sized presentations for the lower river. And then up top, it is getting very clear. So you might want to throw in some very small presentations and precise presentations for that fishery. All right, guys, so that's the news on the Vedder. And I'm filming this at the back end of the report because this one's important to me. I made a mistake on one of the reports that we did a few weeks back. You guys might have seen it. A bunch of guys tuned into it. It was some possible changes that are coming down to the Vedder regulations when it comes to steelhead in regards to maybe a limit increase, possibly some closures depending on the time. I'll leave a link up here because most of the information in that is sound, is good, but we made a mistake. And obviously my goal here is to always give you guys the best information possible so you guys can enjoy your fishery, maximize your time out on the water, but also understand what's going on in the politics, the fisheries science, as well as the fishing itself. And like I said, we made a mistake. So what I was talking about was that they might be taking larger fish to increase the number of broodstock, because if they take a large female, she's going to have more eggs, and they can easily increase the number of eggs that they get for production. But we were spitballing back and forth. I threw the question at my friend of how are you guys going to make up for a slight reduction in the number of broodstock, and he threw a bunch of ways that they could do that. Those are not ways that they are going to do that, and one of the reasons they aren't going to do that is because of genetic diversity. They take genetic diversity very seriously at the hatchery. It's one of their number one mandates, is to make sure that the hatchery fish are not messing with the wild fish. Now, I'm going to leave a link to a video that the Steelhead Society did on some of the concerns on this, but I'm also not going to throw all the hatcheries out there under the bus, because I think there is a area or a need for hatcheries in certain areas, in certain very specific spots, and I think the Vedder is one of them. Long story short, I'm sorry guys, they aren't going to be taking larger fish. I wanted to make sure that was clear so you guys are getting the correct information and there's no, misconceptions out there from what we're saying, and that you guys know that I'm going to endeavor, when I make a mistake, I'm going to call myself out on it. It might include 4 beers on the desk, but we're going to make it happen. All right, let's get into the rest of the report. All right, let's talk Cutthroat, and I am drinking Cutthroat beer for the sake of this report, and it is a sacrifice. I'm not going to give this beer a 10 out of 10. It's running at about a 6.5 on the tasty beer scale, but it is wet and it is beer, so we'll live with that. The fry. Over here, Andre brought in his famous board of fry, and this is a pattern that really represents the salmon fry well in all of their diverse colors. Now, a lot of people say, well, why do we need all these colors? First off, it's more sort of to do with the watercolor and how their colors pop through the watercolor. When we're very, very clear, you're going to find sort of greens and silvers being very obvious to the fish. When you flip it around and the water has a little bit of color either towards the brown or tea side or towards the teal/glacial side, the fry actually pop that color. You'll see them swimming around, and that's my best advice to you, is go hunt for some salmon fry and see what color first catches your eye when you notice them. Sometimes it'll be silver, sometimes it'll be a gold fleck if the sun and slightly tea-colored water is catching on them, and vice versa if you've got sort of a Harrison Lake green color or blue color, you're going to see that from them. And that's what we're kind of trying to match with all these different colors. I love fishing golds when the Squamish is clear, and I like to fish slightly brighter versions when it's dirty. Flip it around, and I've had really good success on the Harrison when it's more of that glacial color with the tealy colors, sort of the bluey green colors on the top and slightly whiter, brighter sides. Bottom line is put a few of them in your box, have a selection, and you will find that especially when you're targeting cutthroat, they can get a little bit picky, at least later on in the season, and the color will play a big factor. So what is this fishery? Well, there's a number of areas you can use these fry patterns. Specifically, the Squamish is an excellent one when it happens. And I'm going to be out this weekend, and I'll be poking around, see if I can find some fry. These are some pictures from last year when we found them just coming out of the gravel. And if I do see them this weekend, I might have a few in the box. I'll try swinging them, but I might try what we call tumbling them first, which is basically putting them under the same rig we've been egg fishing for the last little bit, but nymphing them with a slight swing or twitch at the end. And this is going to be imitating one of those fry that may have not learned how to swim, or quite honestly came out of the egg wrong and died. You'll see those quite often washed up on shore just because they haven't gone through the hatching process well. But it's something that the fish do key in on. Also, the cutthroat side of things is another fishery that we start focusing on soon. And I say soon because the peak spawning time for cutthroat on most of our local streams is February. So we're in spawning season. So that comes with some caveats if you guys plan to go out scouting. And those caveats are you shouldn't be looking for these fish in small creeks areas. If you see some relatively large cutthroat in a small piece of water, there's a high likelihood that they're spawning. But flip that around and you're on a wide open area, let's say on the Harrison or the main stem Fraser. These are probably fish that are either not sexually mature, so they're 3 years old, they've gone to the ocean, but they're sort of in a feeding maturity. Next year, those ones will be spawning. And those are the fish that are sort of like 9 to 12 inches. Now, that may seem boring, but they can be a ton of fun on light rods, and they feed fairly aggressively. Flip it around as we push into March. You're going to find that the mature fish have dropped off their spawning beds and are using the fry hatch to fatten back up after the spawn. Now, some of these fish have probably already dropped back. They've probably already spawned, so you might catch some big ones right now, but we see that the majority of the larger fish come a little bit later in the season. From now on, if you guys are going out, I do recommend making sure you have a couple fry in your box just in case you see it. So how are you going to fish with these? Well, if we're fishing flat water, water that doesn't have a ton of movement like the Harrison, my favorite way to do it is just to hike, watch, cast, hike, watch, cast. You'd still want to prospect, and what I mean by that is throw out casts when you haven't seen fish, but you're not going to do that a lot. I might walk to a spot, make 5 to 10 casts, watch the water for 5 minutes, move 20, 30 feet, do it again. Move 20, 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet even, do it again. And the entire time I'm looking for something to happen. I'm looking for a sign that these fish are feeding. And the wonder of fry is when they start moving as they swim in the first 6 to 8 inches of water. So it's very common that you'll see a slurp on the surface as the cutthroat comes from underneath and eats them and breaks the surface or ripples the surface. And it's something your eye can pick up on. It's a fun way to hunt around on a back slough or the Harrison, and it's definitely a cool fishery that sometimes gets overlooked. 3-weight rods, 4-weight rods, 5-weight rods are ideal. Some guys prefer longer rods for it, as well as your lightweight spinning tackle with a small spinner or a small spoon can be extremely effective. All right, on the saltwater front, we had some good reports this week, and I was talking to a couple of our guides, and they said, hey, yeah, that usually happens in February. The last couple of years, we've been blessed with fairly darn good fishing. Now, I said last week that the fishing was good, and I wasn't lying. There were fish almost every day that we went out, but we haven't heard of any of those real banner days. Well, we heard of them this week, and it kind of makes sense. When you look at the tides last week when a lot of our boats were going out, it was a full moon cycle, and the tides were quite big. This can make things a little more challenging, pushes the boat around, pushes the fish around, and the fish don't feed quite as actively just because the bait's hiding in the heavy current. We had some more mellow tides this week, and the results were obvious. We had some much better numbers, some of the first, I would say, large number days that I've heard of. And we had good reports up Howe Sound, backside of Bowen, as well as even in the harbor. And I had some good reports from across the way, up Polier Pass and Thrasher Rock. So definitely worth getting out there. This is the tides for right now when you guys are seeing this. Actually, that was yesterday. This is 21st, which is you guys today. And you can see they're fairly mellow right in the middle of the day, which is exactly what you guys want to see for winter fishing. You can move around, cover a lot of ground. So definitely worth getting out over the weekend when we see that fairly mellow tide push right into Sunday. All right, thanks for sticking with me, guys, to the end of the report. I promised I'd give you guys a little JT update. As you know, he's been working his butt off over the last few months, both on sounder issues and conservation issues. He took a much needed, very short little vacation and snuck down to the Olympic Peninsula. Now, I haven't got the full report yet. I'm hoping to share that with you later on in future reports, but he has been sending some hilarious pictures, and from those pictures, I'm not so sure they're catching a ton of fish, but I do believe they're having an excellent time enjoying a semi-new fishery, one that we obviously don't talk about very much, but also one that is very, very steeped in history as well as conservation issues. But Jay shared a video from one of the guides he was working with down there, and I thought it was interesting. Now, at Pacific Angler, we love gear fishing, saltwater fishing, and fly fishing, but you guys know my base is in fly fishing, and specifically swinging flies for steelhead. And so I thought this video was interesting. Now, it's definitely got some cool footage, cool little story, some beautiful fish shots, but an interesting mentality that this one guide has taken on, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. I'm going to leave the link up here, and hope you guys can maybe kill some time if you're not getting out on the water this weekend. Well, guys, that's everything I've got for you this weekend. As always, you want to see more details on this stuff, we do a written version of the report that can be much more detailed than me rambling on in 8 to 12 minutes. That's linked down in the description below, so check that out if you want more details on all the fisheries around the Lower Mainland. Also, if you guys want to see more reports like this, consider hitting the subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll catch you in the next Friday Fishing Report.